What would you do if a broken soul looked into your eyes, pleading for a second chance? In a shelter echoing with despair, a scarred German shepherd awaited his fate. But in the darkest moment, something extraordinary happened, something that would change lives forever. What could have sparked such hope? Rex lay curled in the far corner of the kennel, his scarred body shivering despite the warm air in the shelter. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting an eerie glow on the row of cages filled with restless dogs. Some barked incessantly, their cries echoing off the concrete walls. Others sat in stoic silence, resigned to their fate. But Rex was different. His quiet whimpers, barely audible over the chaos, carried a weight of despair that even the shelter staff struggled to ignore. He hadn't eaten much in days, and the untouched food bowl next to him was evidence of his dwindling will to live. His dark eyes, haunted and hollow, avoided the people passing by. Few lingered at his cage, and none dared to unlock it. A sign taped to the front read, in bold black letters, "Aggressive. Do not approach." The words were a death sentence. For Rex, time was running out. Miles away, Emily sat at her cluttered kitchen table, scrolling absent-mindedly through the shelter's website on her laptop. She wasn't looking for a dog. Not really. Her small apartment wasn't exactly ideal for pets, and her long hours as a vet tech often left her too exhausted to consider taking on more responsibility. But as she sipped her coffee, a familiar ache stirred in her chest. She had seen too much pain in her work, too many animals abandoned, neglected, or misunderstood. It was a weight she carried daily, but one she couldn't seem to put down. When Rex's picture appeared on her screen, Emily froze. His face filled the frame, a mix of power and vulnerability that took her breath away. His ears were pinned back, his body low to the ground as if bracing for an unseen blow. The caption below the photo warned potential adopters. Rex, male, German Shepherd, history of aggression, not suitable for families or small children. Yet, despite the cautionary tone, Emily couldn't look away. His eyes seemed to speak directly to her, pleading for something she couldn't quite name. Before she realized it, she had clicked the button to schedule a visit. The shelter smelled of antiseptic and damp fur when Emily arrived the next morning. A staff member greeted her with a clipboard and a tired smile. "You're here for Rex?" The woman's tone was skeptical. "I'll be honest, he's not an easy case. He's been here for months, and we've had no luck placing him. Most people take one look and move on." Emily nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'd still like to meet him." The woman led her through the narrow hallway lined with cages. As they approached Rex's kennel, the barking of the other dogs seemed to fade, replaced by the low, pitiful whine Emily had heard so many times in her line of work. When she stepped closer, her breath caught. Rex was even thinner than his photo suggested, his ribs visible beneath his patchy coat. Scars crisscrossed his muzzle and shoulders, evidence of a violent past. He didn't growl or bark as she approached. Instead, he pressed himself further into the corner, trembling. "He's unpredictable," the staff member warned. "He was rescued from a dogfighting operation. We've done what we can, but, well, you can see how he is." Emily knelt beside the kennel, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. "Hi there, Rex," she murmured, her voice soft and steady. She extended her hand, palm up, just far enough for him to catch her scent. He didn't move. His dark eyes flicked to her face, then away again, as if even making eye contact was too much to bear. The staff member sighed. "He's never going to be a normal dog. Honestly, we're out of options. If someone doesn't take him soon." The words hung in the air, unfinished but understood. Emily turned her gaze back to Rex. She could see the fear in him, the wariness born of too many betrayals. But there was something else, too, a flicker of something fragile and desperate. Hope, maybe, though it seemed almost impossible to name it that. "I'll take him," Emily said, the words surprising even herself. The staff member blinked. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Emily interrupted. Her tone left no room for argument. "I'll take him." The adoption paperwork was a blur of signatures and instructions, warnings and reminders. Before long, Emily was walking out of the shelter, a leash in one hand and a trembling, reluctant Rex at her side. He hesitated at every step, his paws dragging against the concrete as if afraid to leave the only world he knew, no matter how cruel it had been. The car ride home was silent except for the occasional rustle of Rex shifting in the back seat. Emily glanced at him in the rearview mirror, her heart aching at the sight of him hunched low, his body pressed against the door. She spoke softly to him, telling him about his new home, about the bed and the toys she'd prepared, about the quiet he'd find there. He didn't respond, of course, but she hoped he heard her, that some part of him understood he was finally safe. When they arrived, Emily opened the car door and waited. Rex stared at her, unmoving. She crouched down, holding the leash loosely, her voice a gentle coax. "Come on, Rex. It's okay." After what felt like an eternity, he stepped out, his movements slow and tentative. Emily led him inside, where he immediately retreated to the corner of the living room, curling into a tight ball. She set a bowl of water nearby and left him alone, giving him the space he needed. As she watched him from across the room, her heart swelled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. It wouldn't be easy. She knew that much. But as Rex closed his eyes, exhausted but no longer trembling, Emily allowed herself to believe it was a start. The ride home was a quiet one, punctuated only by the occasional sound of Rex shifting in the back seat. He refused to sit still, his body low and tense, his eyes darting to every shadow and passing vehicle. Emily kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, her voice soft and steady as she spoke to him. She told him about his new home, the soft bed waiting for him, the toys she had picked out, and the quiet, safe life they would share. Rex didn't respond, of course, but she hoped her words would be a balm to his frayed nerves. His reactions, though subtle, made her chest ache. A slight flinch at a sudden honk, a quiet whimper when the car turned sharply. It was as if every sound carried the weight of a memory he'd rather forget. When they arrived at her small apartment, Rex hesitated before stepping out of the car. Emily didn't rush him. She crouched down at his level, holding the leash loosely and speaking softly. After a long pause, Rex finally moved, his steps slow and cautious as he followed her to the front door. Once inside, he froze, his ears pinned back and his eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. Emily knelt again, giving him a moment to adjust. She set down a bowl of water and a plate of boiled chicken, stepping back to give him space. Rex didn't move toward the food. Instead, he backed into a corner of the living room and curled up tightly, his body pressed against the wall. Emily's heart sank, but she didn't let her disappointment show. She knew this would be a long journey, one requiring more patience than most people would be willing to give. She busied herself with unpacking a few supplies. Chew toys, a blanket, a sturdy crate she'd picked up after signing the adoption papers. The sight of the crate made her stomach twist. She hated the idea of confining him after all he had been through, but she also knew he needed a safe space to retreat to, a place where he could feel secure. Over the next few days, Emily's life revolved around Rex. She kept her movements slow and deliberate, her voice low and soothing. She tried everything to coax him out of his corner, offering treats, sitting on the floor with a book, even pretending to ignore him in hopes he'd approach out of curiosity. For the most part, Rex stayed where he was, his wary eyes tracking her every move. He ate and drank only when she was out of sight, his survival instincts still overriding any budding trust. The first breakthrough came late one night. Emily had fallen asleep on the floor near his crate, her body curled awkwardly on a pile of blankets. She had intended only to sit with him for a while, but exhaustion had caught up with her. When she woke in the dim glow of the living room lamp, she realized something was different. Rex was no longer in his corner. He was standing a few feet away, his nose twitching as he cautiously sniffed her hand. Emily held her breath, not wanting to startle him. Slowly, she turned her head, meeting his eyes. There was no fear in them this time, only hesitation. She whispered his name, and though he didn't respond, he didn't retreat either. It was a small moment, but to Emily it felt monumental. Encouraged by this tiny step forward, Emily continued to build their routine. Each morning, she took Rex outside for a walk, though walk was a generous term. He would freeze at the slightest sound, his body rigid and his eyes scanning for threats. Emily stayed patient, waiting him out when he refused to move, praising him quietly for every small step. She began to notice patterns in his behavior, the way he flinched at loud noises, how he avoided certain areas of the yard, how he seemed most at ease when he could see her from a safe distance. These observations gave her clues about his past, but they also gave her hope. Slowly but surely, Rex was beginning to trust her. There were setbacks, of course. One afternoon, as Emily was preparing his meal, she accidentally dropped a metal pan. The loud clang sent Rex into a frenzy, his growls and frantic pacing filling the room. It took nearly an hour for him to calm down, and Emily blamed herself for days after. But each time something went wrong, she reminded herself that healing wasn't linear. Rex had lived a life of fear and violence. Undoing that kind of damage would take more than a few weeks of kindness. By the end of the second week, Rex began to show glimmers of his true self. He started following Emily around the apartment, always keeping a few feet of distance but never letting her out of his sight. He began to wag his tail, just barely, and only when she spoke to him in a particularly cheerful tone. But it was there. One evening, as she sat on the couch reading, she felt a gentle weight against her leg. Looking down, she saw Rex resting his head on her knee. Her throat tightened, and tears blurred her vision as she reached down to stroke his ears. For the first time, he didn't pull away. Emily knew they still had a long way to go. Rex's scars, both physical and emotional, would never fully disappear. But in moments like these, she felt the weight of their progress, the quiet but undeniable bond that was forming between them. Each small victory reminded her why she had taken this chance, why she had looked past the warnings and the doubts. Rex wasn't just healing, he was learning to live. And in doing so, he was teaching Emily something too: the power of patience, the importance of trust, and the beauty of second chances. The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, bathing the living room in a soft golden glow. Rex lay by the window, his body stretched out on the warm hardwood floor. It was the first time Emily had seen him relax so completely, his muscles no longer taut with tension. His chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm, and for a moment, he looked almost peaceful. She sipped her coffee quietly, not wanting to disturb him, though her mind was already planning the day ahead. Their walks had become a daily ritual, a time when she could see glimpses of the dog Rex might have been before his life was torn apart. Their routine took them to a small park nearby, quiet and secluded, with enough open space for Rex to feel safe. At first, he had been reluctant, his paws dragging as Emily coaxed him forward step by step. But now, though still cautious, he moved with a bit more confidence. This morning, Emily noticed his ears perk up at the chirping of birds, his nose twitching as he caught the scents carried by the breeze. She smiled, encouraged by these small signs of curiosity. It felt like watching a flower slowly bloom after a harsh winter. As they walked, Emily's thoughts wandered to Rex's past. The scars on his body told a story she could only piece together from fragments. A life of violence, fear, and survival. She had learned from the shelter staff that Rex had been rescued from a dogfighting operation, one of many animals discarded when they were no longer useful to their handlers. The cruelty of it made her stomach turn, but it also deepened her resolve to give Rex the life he deserved. He had survived so much. Now, it was her turn to help him heal. Her reverie was interrupted by the low hum of an engine. A sleek black car slowed as it approached the park, its windows tinted so dark that Emily couldn't see who was inside. She felt a flicker of unease as the car lingered near the curb. Rex froze, his ears flattening as he lowered his body instinctively. The car lingered for a moment longer before accelerating and disappearing down the street. Emily tried to dismiss it as a coincidence, but the tension in her chest lingered. That evening, after Rex had settled in his crate, Emily sat down at her laptop. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the car. Her curiosity soon turned into determination as she began researching dogfighting rings and the networks that perpetuated them. What she found was both horrifying and illuminating. Stories of dogs trained to fight, discarded when they lost, and sometimes even tracked down by their abusers if they escaped. The idea sent a chill down her spine. Could the people who had once owned Rex be looking for him? The thought seemed far-fetched, but the memory of that black car refused to fade. Over the next few days, Emily noticed subtle changes in Rex's behavior. He had been making progress, showing more trust and even moments of joy, but now he seemed more withdrawn. His tail tucked lower, and he startled more easily at sudden noises. It was as if something had stirred his old fears, dragging him back into a mindset of survival. Emily couldn't ignore the possibility that he sensed something she didn't. The unease came to a head one evening as Emily prepared dinner. The apartment was quiet except for the soft clinking of pots and pans, but Rex's low growl made her freeze. She turned to see him standing by the window, his body rigid, his gaze fixed on the street below. Emily approached cautiously, peering outside. Her breath hitched when she saw the same black car idling across the street. A man stood beside it, his face obscured by a hood. He appeared to be scanning the area, his movements deliberate and unsettling. Before Emily could react, the man glanced toward the building, then climbed back into the car. The vehicle sped away, leaving Emily's heart pounding in her chest. That night, sleep eluded her. She sat on the couch with Rex curled up beside her, his head resting on her lap. Her fingers absent-mindedly stroked his fur as she replayed the events in her mind. She couldn't ignore the possibility that Rex's past was catching up to him. If these people were truly looking for him, what did they want? Her instincts told her it couldn't be anything good. She needed to protect him. But how? The following morning, Emily decided to act. She contacted the shelter where Rex had been rescued, hoping to gather more information about his history. One of the staff members, an older woman named Carol, remembered Rex vividly. "He was one of the worst cases we've seen," Carol said, her voice tinged with sadness. "The scars, the fear. It was clear he'd been through hell. But we don't have much information about the people involved. The operation was shut down, but not everyone responsible was caught." Emily's stomach churned at the implications. Determined not to wait for trouble to find them, Emily began looking into ways to safeguard their home. She reinforced the locks on her doors and windows and invested in a small security camera for the front porch. She also reached out to a friend who worked in law enforcement, explaining her concerns without delving into too much detail. The friend promised to keep an ear out for any reports of suspicious activity in the area. Despite her precautions, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Rex, too, seemed more alert, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings during walks, his ears twitching at every sound. Yet, amidst the fear and uncertainty, Emily saw moments of courage in him. He stayed close to her, his presence a reminder that they were in this together. If Rex could face his fears, so could she. Together, they would find a way to move forward, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The morning air was crisp and heavy with the scent of dew as Emily loaded the last of her belongings into the car. Rex sat silently in the back seat, his eyes darting nervously between her and the open yard. He could sense the urgency in her movements, the way her hands trembled slightly as she secured the latch on the crate she had placed in the trunk for emergencies. Emily had made her decision the night before, lying awake in the dim light of her bedroom with Rex curled at her feet. The black car had returned, circling her block twice before disappearing into the night, and she knew she couldn't wait for the threat to escalate. It wasn't just her safety at risk, it was Rex's, and she refused to let the people who had hurt him take him back. The drive to the countryside was long, winding through stretches of open fields and dense forests. Emily kept her focus on the road, glancing at Rex in the rearview mirror every so often. He was alert but calm, his ears flicking at the hum of the engine. She spoke to him softly, filling the silence with reassurances. "We're going somewhere safe," she said. "You'll like it there. Lots of space, no more scary cars. Just you and me." Her voice cracked slightly at the end, betraying her own fears, but Rex didn't seem to notice. His gaze remained fixed on the window, watching the world blur past. By the time they reached the farm, the sun was high in the sky, casting golden light across the rolling hills. Emily's aunt, Marjorie, was waiting for them at the gate, her weathered face breaking into a warm smile as she waved them in. Marjorie had been an animal trainer for decades before retiring to this quiet corner of the world, and her home reflected her love for creatures of all kinds. The barn housed a small flock of chickens and a few rescue horses, while the pastures stretched out endlessly, bordered by sturdy wooden fences. Emily parked the car and opened the door, letting Rex step out on his own. He moved cautiously, his nose twitching as he sniffed the unfamiliar scents of hay and earth. Marjorie approached slowly, her hands in her pockets, her movements deliberate. "So, this is Rex," she said, her voice calm and even. "He's a handsome boy, a little worse for wear, but I can see he's got a good heart." Emily nodded, her throat tightening as she watched Rex take a hesitant step forward. He sniffed the ground, then glanced up at Marjorie, his body tense but not retreating. Over the next few days, the farm began to work its magic on Rex. The open spaces gave him a sense of freedom he hadn't known before, and the absence of loud city noises seemed to soothe his nerves. Emily spent hours walking with him through the fields, letting him explore at his own pace. At first, he stuck close to her side, his movements cautious and deliberate. But gradually, he began to venture farther, his tail wagging faintly as he trotted ahead. The sight of him running, his legs stretching out in a joyful sprint, brought tears to Emily's eyes. It was as if he was discovering a part of himself that had been buried for so long. Marjorie proved to be an invaluable ally in helping Rex adjust. She taught Emily new techniques for building trust and reinforcing positive behavior, often joining them for their evening walks. "He's learning to feel safe," Marjorie said one evening as they watched Rex chase a butterfly across the pasture. "But it's not just about him. You're learning too. He's teaching you patience, resilience. That bond you're building, it's rare. Cherish it." Despite the peace of the farm, Emily couldn't completely shake her fears. The memory of the black car and the man who had called Rex's old name lingered in the back of her mind, a shadow she couldn't outrun. She had installed motion-activated lights around the property and kept her phone close at all times, ready to call for help if needed. Marjorie didn't question her precautions, sensing the weight Emily carried without needing to pry. "You're doing what you need to do," she said simply. "That's all that matters." One afternoon, as Emily was tending to the horses, Rex began to bark. It was a sharp, urgent sound, different from the tentative noises he had made when he first arrived. She dropped the pitchfork she was holding and rushed outside, her heart pounding. Rex stood at the edge of the pasture, his body rigid, his gaze fixed on the distant tree line. Emily followed his line of sight, her breath catching when she saw the faint outline of a car in the distance. It wasn't black, but its presence was enough to send a jolt of fear through her. Marjorie appeared at her side, her expression calm but serious. "You've got to trust him," she said. "Dogs like Rex, they know when something's wrong. Keep an eye out, but don't panic. You're not alone here." Emily nodded, her hand tightening on Rex's leash as she led him back toward the house. That night, she double-checked the locks on the doors and windows, her mind racing with possibilities. But as she sat on the porch with Rex by her side, watching the stars blink into existence, she felt a small measure of peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she wasn't facing them alone. Rex's presence was a constant reminder of what they had already overcome, of the strength they had found in each other. Together, they would face whatever came next. The night was still and heavy with anticipation. The moon cast a pale glow over the farmhouse, its light filtering through the thin curtains of the bedroom where Emily lay awake. Rex was curled at the foot of the bed, his chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of sleep. Yet even in his rest, there was a tension in the set of his body, a readiness to react. Emily reached out to stroke his fur, her fingers brushing against the faint ridges of his scars. Each mark told a story of pain, survival, and resilience, a past he had fought so hard to leave behind. She wanted so desperately to protect him from anything that threatened to pull him back into that darkness. The first sound came just before midnight. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but Rex's ears twitched, and his eyes snapped open. Emily froze, her heart pounding as she strained to listen. Then it came again, a quiet crunch of gravel, as if someone was moving outside. Rex rose to his feet, his body low and tense, a low growl rumbling from deep in his throat. Emily sat up, her pulse quickening. She reached for her phone on the bedside table, her fingers trembling as she unlocked it and turned on the security camera feed. The grainy footage revealed two figures moving through the shadows near the barn. One of them carried a flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. Emily's mind raced. The men had found them. She didn't know how, but they had tracked Rex to the farm. She swallowed hard, her breath shallow as she tried to formulate a plan. Marjorie's words from earlier echoed in her mind. "You've got to trust him." She glanced at Rex, his eyes locked on the window, his growl growing louder. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're going to handle this together." Moving quickly but quietly, Emily slipped out of bed and pulled on her boots. She grabbed a heavy flashlight and a can of pepper spray from the drawer by the door, her hands shaking as she clipped the leash onto Rex's collar. "Stay close," she murmured, and though he was already poised to follow her every move, she felt the words were as much for herself as for him. They stepped into the cool night air, the stillness broken only by the distant murmur of voices. The intruders hadn't noticed them yet, their attention focused on the barn. Emily approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. She could see them more clearly now. Two men, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other wiry and restless. They were speaking in low tones, but their intent was clear as they moved toward the barn door. One of them carried a metal crowbar, its edge catching the moonlight. Emily's breath hitched, and her grip tightened on the leash. She could feel Rex's body vibrating with suppressed energy, his growl a constant undercurrent of warning. The wiry man was the first to notice them. He froze, nudging his companion and pointing in their direction. "Well, look who it is," the taller man said, his voice carrying a mocking edge. "You've got our dog, lady. Hand him over and we'll be on our way." Emily stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. "He's not your dog. You don't get to come here and make demands. Leave now, or I'll call the police." The taller man laughed, the sound harsh and grating. "Call them if you want. By the time they get here, we'll be long gone. Just give us the mutt. He's worth more than you think." Rex barked sharply, his body pulling against the leash as if he could sense the tension in the air. The sound was loud and commanding, cutting through the man's bravado like a blade. Emily felt a surge of pride and fear all at once. "You're not taking him," she said firmly. "Not now, not ever." The wiry man stepped closer, his crowbar swinging casually at his side. "Lady, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Before Emily could respond, Rex lunged. His movement was so sudden and powerful that the leash slipped from her grasp. He charged at the wiry man, teeth bared, a deep, guttural growl erupting from his throat. The man stumbled back, dropping the crowbar as Rex closed the distance. The taller man shouted, raising his flashlight like a weapon, but he hesitated, clearly unprepared for the sheer ferocity of the dog before him. Emily acted on instinct, grabbing the pepper spray and aiming it at the taller man. The burst of spray hit him squarely in the face, and he let out a pained yell, clutching at his eyes. Rex, meanwhile, had pinned the wiry man to the ground, his teeth inches from the man's throat. He didn't bite, but the threat was unmistakable. The chaos lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Marjorie appeared out of nowhere, wielding a shotgun she kept for emergencies. "I suggest you boys leave," she said, her voice cold and unwavering. "And if you ever come back, you won't be so lucky." The men scrambled to their feet, their bravado shattered. They stumbled toward their car, shouting threats as they fled. Emily didn't lower her guard until the sound of the engine faded into the distance. Only then did she turn to Rex, who stood panting but uninjured, his eyes bright with adrenaline. She dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around him. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You were so brave." That night, as they sat on the porch together, the stars overhead felt brighter than ever. Emily knew the fight wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt a deep, unshakable sense of hope. Rex wasn't just healing. He was protecting, fighting back, proving to the world, and to himself, that he was more than the sum of his scars. Together, they would face whatever came next, stronger than ever. The farm had returned to its tranquil rhythm, but something fundamental had changed. Emily stood on the porch, watching Rex as he moved through the open field with a sense of freedom that brought tears to her eyes. His steps were confident now, no longer weighed down by the fear that had once consumed him. The scars on his body were still visible, but they seemed less like marks of his past and more like symbols of his resilience. Emily had replayed the events of that terrifying night over and over in her mind, marveling at how far Rex had come. He had faced his past head-on and emerged stronger, braver, and more determined than she ever thought possible. Marjorie joined her on the porch, a mug of tea in her hand. "He's different now," she said, her gaze following Rex as he paused to sniff at a patch of wildflowers. "There's a light in him I didn't see before. It's like he's finally found his place in the world." Emily nodded, her heart swelling with pride. She had seen that same light. It shone in the way Rex carried himself, the way he approached the world with a cautious but growing trust. It was a transformation she hadn't dared to hope for when she first brought him home. Despite the newfound peace, Emily couldn't forget the threats the men had made before they fled. She had filed a report with the local authorities, providing as much detail as she could about the encounter. Marjorie's shotgun and Rex's bravery had likely scared them off for good, but Emily wasn't one to take chances. She had installed additional security measures around the farm, including cameras and motion sensors, and remained vigilant during her walks with Rex. Still, she refused to let fear dictate their lives. This farm was their sanctuary, and she was determined to protect it. In the weeks that followed, Rex continued to thrive. He had taken to following Emily everywhere, his protective instincts stronger than ever. Whether she was tending to the horses or working in the garden, he was always close by, his presence a constant source of comfort. He had also formed an unlikely friendship with one of Marjorie's older rescue dogs, a gentle Labrador named Daisy. The two of them often played together in the fields, their carefree energy a stark contrast to the tension that had once defined Rex's every move. Watching them, Emily felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life they were building together. One afternoon, Emily decided to take Rex into town for the first time since their escape to the farm. The local animal shelter was hosting an adoption event, and she wanted to support their efforts. She wasn't sure how Rex would handle the noise and activity, but she felt it was time to show him that the world outside the farm wasn't something to fear. Rex seemed to sense her apprehension as she clipped on his leash, his ears perking up as he wagged his tail faintly. "You ready for an adventure?" she asked, scratching behind his ears. He responded by leaning into her touch, his trust in her evident in the relaxed way he moved beside her. The event was held in a park on the edge of town, and the moment they arrived, Emily felt the weight of her decision. The area was bustling with people and dogs, the air filled with the sounds of laughter, barking, and conversation. Rex tensed slightly at first, his body stiff as he took in the unfamiliar surroundings. But Emily knelt beside him, her voice calm and steady as she reassured him. "You're safe," she murmured, stroking his fur. "I'm right here with you." As they walked through the event, something remarkable happened. People began to notice Rex, not with fear or suspicion, but with admiration. They asked about his story, marveling at the bond between him and Emily. Some of the shelter staff recognized her and were moved by the progress Rex had made since his time on death row. One woman knelt to pet him, and to Emily's astonishment, Rex allowed it. His body was still, his tail wagging softly as he leaned into the woman's hand. It was a moment Emily would carry with her forever, a testament to how far he had come. By the end of the day, Rex had surprised even Emily. He had approached other dogs cautiously but without fear, sniffing noses and wagging his tail. He had let strangers pet him, his trust in Emily giving him the courage to face the unknown. As they drove back to the farm, Emily couldn't stop smiling. "You were amazing today," she said, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. Rex let out a soft huff, his head resting on his paws, content and at ease. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily sat on the porch with Marjorie and Rex. The air was cool and quiet, the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Marjorie leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she said, "I think Rex is more than just a survivor. He's a reminder that even the most broken souls can find their way back to the light." Emily nodded, her eyes misting as she looked at Rex. He lay at her feet, his eyes half closed, his body relaxed in a way that spoke of a deep and abiding trust. She reached down to stroke his fur, her heart full of gratitude. "He's taught me so much," she said softly, "about patience, about resilience. But most of all, he's taught me about love." As the night deepened, Emily felt a profound sense of peace. The journey she and Rex had shared was far from over, but for the first time, she felt certain that their future was bright. Together, they had faced the shadows of the past and emerged stronger, their bond unshakable. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it side by side, their scars a testament not to pain, but to the strength it took to heal. Thank you so much for watching and joining us on this heartfelt journey. We hope Rex's story of resilience, trust, and second chances touched your heart as much as it did ours. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more inspiring tales, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more incredible stories like this one, showcasing the power of love and hope in overcoming life's challenges. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We can't wait to see you again in our next stories, where even more unforgettable journeys await. Thank you for being part of our community.